We are going to get started. I'm Bethany, this is Erica. Today you will learn all things APD application and appeals. So we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to show you through a definition example how to apply and how to successfully submit an APD application. Technically sufficient. It's going to be a great training because Eric is going to do most of the training and Erica knows what she's doing. There are a couple of things that we will not touch today. We're going to stay away from this subject area with a 10-foot pole, and that involves the overlap of APD applications with extended foster care. We're staying away from that area. We're not touching that area because that area is kind of up in the air. Yeah. What we will do, though, is make sure that you understand if a youth meets certain criteria, they are eligible for an application, and we strongly suggest that that application be filed, regardless of their age, regardless of their classification in foster care. We very much want this to be an interactive training, so we'll ask questions throughout the training. As a reward for you participating, you will receive prizes beyond your wildest dreams. And by prizes beyond your wildest dreams, I mean candy. That's it. That's all we have. But we're going to get started. Make sure that you ask us questions throughout the training if you have them. We also build in some time at the end for questions, so if you forget something, let us know, and let's get started.
Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to give a survey of the room. Can I see, can you raise your hand if you're with the GL program in any capacity? Great. My folks from DCS, CLS? Wonderful. Do I have anybody from CBC? Awesome. You guys are my friends. I'll tell you why. I guess maybe community partners or attorneys for kids. Do I have any attorneys for kids in here? Awesome. Welcome. And then community partners, anybody else? Okay. APD? Oh! I'm going to say lots about you guys. How many of you have submitted APD applications previously? What do you guys think about the process? Okay. Excellent. See the technological thing. All right, so Bethany and I work at the Legal Aid Society, but we are the carve-out program. We are the Guardian Ad Litem program. So I am a GAL staff attorney working exclusively with kids that have developmental disabilities, and I have been for almost 5 years. We're going to talk about some statistical data, the actual definition for developmental disabilities, and I like to talk about this because I do get calls from people around the state that want to apply for a kid who has bipolar. He can't do that. We're going to talk about the Agency for Persons with Disabilities application process, and we're going to quickly touch upon the appellate process, and I'll explain why. Talk about our GL advocacy, and then if you have any questions, please ask as we go along. What is the goal? The goal is pretty simple. I want all of you guys to be able to file APD applications that are perfect. That way they won't get denied, right? So here's some of the statistical data. 10% of our general population have a disability, and this is just disability. This isn't developmental disability. Okay? For child welfare, we actually have a really, really wide range. The range we're given is between 20 to 60%. Okay? In Orange County, I can tell you that about 20% of the youth that we work with have a developmental disability. So think about the whole number. It's a lot more. Now, we know that children with a disability are 3 times more likely to be abandoned, abused, or neglected. Why? These are some of the reasons. Parents have a disability themselves. Unfortunately, we have children where the abuse caused the disability. Neglect suffered during pregnancy, or the parents or caregivers can no longer cope because the child is getting older and now they can't handle their behaviors. So what are developmental disabilities? This is the state of Florida definition. A disorder or syndrome attributable to autism, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, Prader-Willi syndrome, intellectual disability, and spina bifida. It must manifest prior to the age of 18. The reason why that's important is because the federal definition is prior to the age of 22. So if you're working with youth who are over the age of 18, and you didn't have any documentation prior to the age of 18, we can still pursue disability benefits under Social Security as long as we have documentation prior to the age of 18. and it must constitute a substantial handicap that will likely be indefinite. Now we're going to talk about a little bit about each developmental disability. Here's the state of Florida definition of 393, which is the chapter for developmental disabilities on autism. I have underlined severe learning, communication, and behavior disorders. It's got to be severe, okay? So here we talk about placid, and just what people would normally or previously would have thought of as having autism. And if you have any questions, just raise your hand. Asperger's, or what people traditionally call high-functioning autism. And then our children with pervasive developmental disorder, otherwise known as PDD-NOS. You have some symptoms of autism, but you don't have enough of the characteristics for it to have been recognized as it would have been under the DSM-4. As hopefully most of you know, we're under DSM-5. So there are no longer any of these individual diagnoses. They're all just autism spectrum disorder. Okay? And on the slides that you guys were provided, I actually had the wrong information. I had 1 in 88 children. And the CDC report for this year is 1 in 68 children, and 1 in 42 boys, and 1 in 252 girls. All right, so I have a question for you guys. This is candy time. And it's good candy, too. Which one of these three may be accepted by APD?
It all depends.
I'm sorry?
It all depends.
Well, that's why I said may.
Because you can have Asperger's, but still have the severe problems, even though you might be considered high functioning. Where you could have classic, where you hit all of the areas, but still have an above IQ and be denied. And you can have persuasive and have severe problems.
That's absolutely correct. Now, I'm going to tell you, though, there was a rule challenge on Asperger's in children with PDD-NOS. And the court ruled in favor of APD that if a child has Asperger's or PDD-NOS, that they will not qualify for APD. The children have to have a severe form of autism. Oh, wait. Back that up. No. Next one we're going to talk about is cerebral palsy. And it's a group of disabling symptoms which results from damage to the developing brain, and it does not include symptoms or impairments resulting solely from a stroke. Again, this is the state of Florida definition. Here I just have some more information. It's not a disease, not progressive, nor communicable. And 2 out of every 1,000 babies born will develop CP. Okay? The next one is Down syndrome. This one was just added a couple of years ago to the categories of developmental disability. And it's a disorder caused by the presence of an extra chromosome 21. And the reason why I say it was just added a couple of years ago is most of the kids usually fall under intellectual disability. So they did qualify, but it just got added as a separate category. Prader-Willi. It's actually a pretty rare genetic disease that just for the first time in my career, we just got our first kid in this county that has Prader-Willi, so I'm starting to learn a lot about Prader-Willi. But it's an inherited condition where basically the babies usually start out with failure to thrive, and then something kind of switches, and then they have an excessive drive to eat. The way that someone has explained it to me is they're always hungry. They kind of like are never not hungry. So the child that I'm working with, the family has the refrigerator and the pantry with a padlock, and they have to measure out the food for everybody in the family, and it's all the same amount of food for everybody. Another one is spina bifida. The person has to have a medical diagnosis of spina bifida. I will not try to read the rest of that because I won't be able to. During pregnancy, the spine doesn't close, causing mobility or buildup of fluid in the brain, and it can cause physical and learning disabilities. And it's usually, easily identified during pregnancy or upon birth. So hopefully our moms are getting prenatal care, so we know about this ahead of time. All right, we're going to talk about intellectual disabilities. I got a lot of questions about this one. State of Florida definition is significantly sub-average, general intellectual functioning, existing concurrently with deficits in adaptive behavior. The definitions up there of what adaptive behavior and the significantly sub-average general intellectual functioning. So it has to be 2 standard deviations, the general mean is 100. It has to be below 70. Notice I bolded the and. We have to have both the IQ testing and the adaptive behavior score, both under 70. And those are some of the deficits you're going to find in the adaptive behavior. Self-care, learning, self-direction, and capacity for independent living. Okay, so now we're going to actually go through the packet, or if you have it on your iPad. On the back page of the rights for developmental disabilities, we actually have a couple of evaluations for some of the kids I work with. Can anybody tell me? All right, so we're going to go through this. Orange County Public Schools, this is what we call the psychoeducational. We're going to talk about how to get all this stuff in a couple of minutes. Can anybody tell me, by taking a quick look through it, if you can find what the full-scale IQ is? I'll give you a hint. It's called the general conceptual ability.
66.
All right, who has that?
You said you get candy.
You already got candy. Well, we're not candy at the end for everybody. All right. And if we keep flipping through, so we're not just talking about the IQ. So what else do we have to have besides the IQ? I need that adaptive behavior. So I've got a Vineland, which is an acceptable adaptive behavior. We'll talk about acceptable testing in just a few minutes. Anybody know what he got on his adaptive behavior? And I'll give you a hint. That's called the adaptive behavior composite. Yes. Who said that? All right, you get Andy. Perfect. And because when we had gotten this case, when I started working with this youth, I actually did not have any of the school testing or the Vineland. And this comprehensive behavioral health assessment had recommended an IQ test. So we had actually already gotten an order of private psychological with an IQ testing. So on his private psychological, does anybody, if you look through, can anybody tell me, I mean, we're several pages in, can anybody tell me what IQ score he got on that one? I know many of you folks are going to find it quick. Who said 56? You got it. So we have a 66 GCA. I've got a 56 IQ done some years later. And I have a Vineland of 60. Do you think this young man qualified for APD? Yeah. Yes, ma'am, he did. He's currently on the list.
Can you tell me where you found those numbers and stuff?
No problem. If we go back to the, do you mean the first one? Or all of them?
All of them.
Okay, no problem. We go to the psychoeducational, the first one. Starting on the back page of the rights of all persons with developmental disabilities. If we go to page 4 of the psychoeducational, it's kind of like this page, I know it's kind of like not a good copy. So you see the general conceptual ability? That's the score. The scores you see below are his actual sub-scores. Okay, so he's got a cluster verbal, 65, non-verbal, 71, and then those are the actual testing he scores below. Okay, so that's the testing that the school psychologist got for him. Okay, if we keep flipping into the Vineland,
I'm sorry, Eric, so his IQ is 66.
according to that school testing, yes. And then if we go into the Vineland, they kind of give you the summary first, and then you see the actual testing. And under the adaptive behavior score, so that's on page, oh goodness, is it page 205 on the bottom of the Vineland? You keep on going? Yeah, it says 205 on the bottom. Did you find that? And then if we go to the last evaluation, which is the one that's called psychological resilience, and that's a really long one. If we go on page 7 of 11, there's like the box with different scores. And on the bottom of that one it says full scale IQ 56. And the other scores above are his sub-scores, or the other two. Did everybody find that? Okay. Does anybody have any questions for me on that? All right, so here's the big question. How do we identify children with developmental disabilities? We know that when they come into foster care, we're thinking of immediate needs. Shelter, food, clothing, hopefully school. So the question is, how do we identify kids with developmental disabilities? To me, for me, this is the first step. If we don't properly identify them, we're going to have a heck of a time being able to properly serve them and get them all the services that they need. Since our goal is to achieve permanency, one of the best ways to achieve permanency is making sure that their kids are stable. Obviously, the parents have their own issues, so we're trying to get those issues addressed. But in the meantime, we have to have the child as stable as possible if we want, let's say, a goal of reunification to be successful at all. So that is why, this is one of the favorite things to do is identify kids. So how do I identify kids with developmental disabilities? We do them all kinds of different ways. I review the dependency positions when we get them. We actually do review every comprehensive behavioral health assessment that we get for our kids, and we get lots of them, as I'm sure you know as well. Although it takes a long time, I request full records, including psychoeducational, but I don't just get copies of the IEPs. I ask for copies of the school testing. That's going to tell me what's going on. If the child's in an intellectual disability program, I assure you someone in the school system did an IQ test and found that they met criteria, did the IQ and the violence, because otherwise they wouldn't be in the intellectual disability program in school. Okay, that's a federal thing. I also review medical records, including the EPSCT checkups. And I review the psychological evaluations for child and the parent, and also mental health treatment for both of them, and I'll tell you why. I find out a lot about what's going on with the child, sometimes by reading the parent's evaluation. The parents will say, well, of course I have this mental health breakdown, I have, Johnny with autism, and I have all these issues, and nobody's been helping me, and like nobody has ever mentioned that he may have autism. We only find out because of this. So I actually like to review these as well. Anybody have any questions on that? And of course, I like to interview a bunch of people. Isn't that what we do? We interview the kids, I interview the parents, family members. My favorite is I love to interview teachers. I find my teachers are, pretty objective. I do have sometimes family members that tell me, oh, Johnny has autism. Johnny didn't have autism. Mom just said that. I don't know why Mom said that, but she just said that. I love talking to my teachers. My teachers will tell me right off the bat, there's something going on. We have to get this kid evaluated. The parents said anything. And then I'm also, pretty much just interviewing everybody in the family. Is the child on target? Especially my babies. Are my babies crawling at 6 months? Are they close to crawling? Are they close to walking in a year? That kind of thing. Especially my drug-exposed newborns. We're periodically checking on those babies, making sure that they're meeting all of their developmental milestones. So what is the Agency for Persons with Disabilities? They're the state of Florida agency that provides an array of services for those with developmental disabilities. These are some of the available APD services, and I'm going to give you a couple caveats. Adult day training for those older than 21, those that are no longer in school. Behavior analysis services, in-home supports, personal care. The one that a lot of our kids access is what we call residential rehabilitation. Those are the group homes. Our families, a lot of our families are getting respite care if their kids are on the waiver. Supported employment, transportation. There are two things that I want to point out here though. Number one, the service has to be available in your local area. If it's not in your local area, you won't be able to access it. The other thing is, the provider must accept the client. They cannot force a provider to provide respite if they do not want to. So those are some things that you need to keep in mind. That's why I put some available APD services, because it depends on where you are. Some of our clients in more rural areas may not have access to all of these services. They're trying to get providers to provide this, and it's just not happening yet. All right, so we're going to start talking about qualifying for APD. And this is just some general stuff. You have to live in Florida. That's great. Must be a U.S. citizen or qualified non-citizen. Meet the statutory definition of a developmental disability, which we've already talked about. Must be ages 3 and up. And some kids are going to be under the high-risk category until age 5. Kids with intellectual disabilities can go on the high-risk list from 3 to 5, but they will have to have further testing to confirm the developmental disabilities. That's usually done in the school setting. Waiver services must be needed for the person to remain in the community.
What do you mean by high-risk list?
There's a high-risk list. Children ages 3 to 5, so you can apply for APD for kids starting at the age of 3. Certain kids will go straight on the wait list, like if you have a medical condition. If you have spina bifida, you have spina bifida at 5, if you had it. But if a child has an intellectual disability, for example, they may just be in what we call the developmentally delayed program in their early intervention program. That's what their IEP says. But that has to be confirmed. And so usually the schools by age of 6 are doing like an actual IQ test. So that's what I mean by high risk list. If you're on the high risk list, you're not on the wait list at all. Okay? But I still like to apply. We'll talk about why I like to do all this stuff. I still like to apply for our kids to be on the high risk list because I want them to be on the radar of APD if our dependency case closes. I just want them to be on the radar. And they must meet level of care criteria for placement in ICF, that's facility, intermediate care facility. And there are asset and income limits, which don't really apply to our kids because our kids are households of 1, and they don't make more than this. It's a little over 2,000. They don't make that income. And they also have to be, by the way, Medicaid eligible. So most of our kids are getting Social Security benefits. I mean, in foster care, our kids get Medicaid, but if our kids are getting Social Security benefits, then they're getting their Medicaid through Social Security and not Medicaid. So here's the application process. Required a 3-page application and the documentation to support the developmental disability. The vital documents, a copy of the birth certificate and a copy of the Social Security card. And then I would recommend it for the client information sheet and consent for release of information, but I don't think, I mean, in our local area here, we automatically submit it with the packet because you're going to get that. They're going to ask for consent for release of information. And they're going to ask for all of this, and you might as well just do it the first time to make it easier for them. Paperwork from the dependency court that shows who the child is placed with. They usually ask for just a court order that shows the child in DCF custody. And that's pretty much it. And you can actually find these applications on their website at apdcares.org. All right, so we're actually going to go through an application.
You back up 2 slides where you talk about waiver of services and what you meant by that exactly.
Oh, wait, no, I went too far.
It says waiver of services must be needed.
It's basically the statement that, but for the services that APD provides, this person may be institutionalized. So, but for supported day training, supported employment, maybe residential rehabilitation, they would be in an institution, which we don't really have many of. Did that answer your question, sir? Sure. All right, so we're going to go very quickly. I want to show you guys. You guys see that okay? Great. So here are some of the questions that I get. What do we put here? Services requested. I just put any and all services available. I don't think that really truly matters. I am requesting participation in either the family supported living or developmental disabilities on community-based waivers. Yes. What they're actually talking about, that's what they used to call the big waiver and the little waiver, but they don't really exist anymore, but it's in the application. So I just want you to click yes. You just click yes on that. I am requesting to be served in an individual care facility. No. No. The answer is no. You do not want our kids served in an intermediate care facility. All right, let's see. So the rest of this is pretty easy. Oh, is the person in active community-based care? Make sure you fill that out. That lets APD know this is a DCF client. And I do get questions about legal status, minor. That's all it is. And then the rest of this is 6, 7, 8, and 9. This is for APD to fill out, and then you just put the case manager's information or whoever the alternate contact is. Do you have any questions about this? I know I'm going through it kind of quickly, but it's actually a really easy application. Okay, let's see if we can do this one. Wait, I have to get back to that. All right, here's the client information sheet. I know locally we submit this, we're asked to submit this. So here's what I've seen. I've seen people write under primary disability, bipolar, ADHD. That's not what we want there. You're going to put there intellectual disability, autism, spinal bifida, cerebral palsy. Those are the things that you're going to put under primary disability. And the rest of it is pretty straightforward. You know, child's Medicaid number, does the child receive Social Security benefits? It's actually pretty easy.
Is that APD care also explain this? In
Do they also explain?
some of these how-tos or?
I've seen a one-page instruction sheet, but I've actually not seen it with the application online. I've just seen the application online. It's actually in the packet. The instruction sheet, that is all that. So now we're going to talk about the acceptable documentation, okay? Because it's different for the different categories. So for spinal bifida and Prader-Willi, it's a medical diagnosis, and we need 5 pages of medical records concerning the diagnosis. That's pretty straightforward. For cerebral palsy, we need a medical diagnosis that began before age 18 and 5 pages of medical records. I know for our kids it can be difficult finding medical records. Yes, ma'am?
Does 5 pages mean 5 different doctors confirming the diagnosis?
No,
or just
ma'am.
5 different evaluations, or what does it mean?
It means 5 pages.
Just 5 pages? It can be the same doctor or the same?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It can be. Yes, sir.
You also just add that it needs to be a doctor, not like a nurse practitioner, or?
Well, I did with medical, I'm sorry, empty diagnosis. That's a good point.
Because
Yeah,
I know that's the problem typically.
right. And if our kids are in CMS, this is actually not a big deal. It's actually pretty easy to call my nurse care coordinator and say, can I get copies of the last time the child went to PCP and, or, all the documentation. So hopefully our kids will be going to CMS. Down syndrome is a genetic testing. I noticed for all of the above, they must have severe functional limitations in at least 3 major life activities. Okay? Acceptable testing for autism spectrum disorder. The testing can be done by a psychiatrist, licensed psychologist, pediatric neurologist, a developmental pediatrician, and I'm going to tell you, APD really, really loves this ADOS. Okay, so I've submitted applications for kids with ASD, and sometimes I've had the APD psychologist say, I'm going to send the kid to go get an ADOS. Okay, and the kid goes and gets this diagnosis, this testing, and they refer to it as the gold star testing. Kid came back with his ADOS. Kid was found eligible for APD. He met the criteria.
So is that something you would have done prior to the application, or is it referred through the process?
I try to make sure that I have the perfect documentation that I submit with the application. If the child has not had an ADOS, there is a long waiting list, to get to the doctor and make sure you're on the right Medicaid and get the appointment. But if I have a lot of other documentation, I'll submit what I have. And then if they decide they want the child to go get an ADOS, the child goes to get an ADOS. But for the one that I had that I submitted where they sent the child to go get the ADOS, I had tons of documentation. He'd been at a charter school for kids with autism for many years. I had tons. They still wanted him to get the ADOS, and he did, and he was eligible, eligible. Yes, ma'am.
And who does the ADOS? Anyone knows?
Developmental pediatricians are the ones that I've seen do it. In Orlando, I know of 3 people that do it. And there may be more, but I know of 3 in Orlando that do it. Any other questions on that? All right, acceptable testing for intellectual disability. Under the Florida Administrative Code, okay, it has to be an IQ test that score below 70, and you can either be the Stanford today or the Wechsler Adult and Infant Intelligence Scale. Now notice what it says here. It says, an alternative test or evaluation may be used. Okay? It doesn't have to be one of those 2. And in fact, I've submitted plenty others that are not one of those 2. These are some of the other ones that we've seen acceptable. For younger children, Stanford Binet or the Wechsler Preschool, the DAS, the differential ability scale. And then for our older kids, ages up to 15 years, 11 months, the Stanford could make a WISC or the DAS. And then for, also, again, it's sort of the same testing, they just do a little bit, testing is a little bit different depending on the age group. And then for our nonverbal children and adults, my kids usually get the Tony 3. So they may be acceptable. Again, these are the tests that we've submitted that have been found eligible for kids. Kids have been found eligible for 8 weeks. And these are some of the acceptable testing for adaptive behavior. The one that I normally see is the Vineland. I have seen on occasion the adaptive behavior scale, but these are some of the others. And so again, both scores must be under 70. Not 71, not even 70, below 70. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, one of the things I want to make sure we talk about, because I've seen this a lot in the dependency world, is I've seen a lot of children have their CDHAs submitted. Please do not submit the CDHA. It does not have the testing. It is not adequate. I frankly don't think that APD needs to have all of this personal information, because it's really a lot about the parents. I mean, we read it. We know how the parents, grew up and what their background is. It just doesn't have the testing. So I really, really strongly advocate for us to not include CDHAs. I know that they'll say intellectual disability, but it'll say by history. They didn't do an IQ test. They just didn't do it. All right, so one of the big questions I get is, so where do we get these records? Because a lot of times, it's going to take us a long time if we have to have the child get a private IQ test. So I'm putting them down through the schools. I'm calling the schools a lot. Again, if the child's in a special education program for autism or intellectual disability, I ask for the testing. I want the original psychoeducation. I want any subsequent evaluations, which means that show that the child continues to get services under the intellectual disability program. And then if we're going to ask for a psychological, please make sure that you ask for a psychological with an IQ test. The psychologist will not do the IQ test just because you ask for the psychological. You have to say, I want a psychological with an IQ test. I don't normally have to do it, but if I have to get a court order that says it, I do. Psychological with IQ testing. Sometimes we have to, but most of the time we don't. But just saying the child needs to submit to a psychological doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the IQ test. That's something that the assessor needs to know ahead of time. Any questions? All right, so what do we do? All right, so now we've gotten all the documentation. We've hunted everything down. We're ready to go. We've got that copy of the birth certificate, the social security card. I recommend that your point of contact with APD be signed and submitted. Here locally, we've got a CBC utilization manager in Orange County. I send her everything. She signs it and she submits it to APD. I asked her to confirm when she submitted it. Let me know, I keep a record of it. This becomes really important when the decision is made by APD. If the application is submitted by a case manager, and I'm not saying that all case managers don't know what they're doing, but if they submit their own documentation, we're probably going to get a denial. Where is the letter of denial going to go? I'm sorry? It actually goes to the case manager. What's the turnover for our case manager? So then it goes in the mail, and it sits on somebody's desk. We have 30 days to appeal. If no one opens her mail for 30 days, deadline ran. So that's the reason why we have a local point of contact in APD. And I'm pretty sure APD, and I'm not going to speak for them, but I don't think they want to hear from every single case manager and have everybody submit it differently. It's a really streamlined process here in Orange County. I send everything to her. She reviews it. She sends the application. Everything comes back to her. There's really that one person. Okay? So, if you guys don't have that locally, that's something really to think about. But that's what I do. We get, get the point of contact, we submit it, and then we wait. So what's next? If the child is under 6, AP has 45 days to determine eligibility. 7 or over, AP has 60 days to determine eligibility. I'm going to tell you, we don't really have a problem with this. I usually get my letters back from them within 2 or 3 weeks. Unless they decide that the child needs to get testing. If they decide that the child needs to get testing, they usually just hold off on it and say, within a couple of weeks, we need Johnny to go get a date off. We're sending Johnny here. But for the most part, I would say within 2 to 3 weeks, I'm getting the letter back. Okay? So what I normally do when I figure, I get the email back from CBC, I mail the application on this date, I just simply calendar it on my calendar. But I've yet to really, they've never gone anywhere near that deadline. Yes, sir?
If APD is saying that they needed ABOS, did they pay for the testing?
They refer the youth. That's a really good question. I remember with our kid, it was covered by Medicaid. That's a good question, I don't necessarily know. But it was covered for our kid under 18. And if nobody would have paid for it, that was had a CBC report. And I'll just tell you. I did it
Not
wrong.
sure.
I called them and told them, you should pay for this. So if the child is not eligible, they go on the wait list. Yes, they go on the wait list with everybody else. And then if the child is denied, the decision can be appealed. We're just going to quickly discuss the appellate process, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about sorry, making sure I cover everything. Sounds like a wait. So appellate process, what can we appeal? Pretty much we can appeal anything. Eligibility denial, a crisis school enrollment denial, prior service authorization. So that is if the youth is already receiving residential rehabilitation at a certain rate and it gets decreased, that can be denied, that can be appealed, whether denied, reduced, or terminated. You can also do an appeal for something called rebasing. Rebasing is, let's say you get $12,000 in your cost plan and you only use $10,000. Next year you may only get $10,000. You can actually appeal. That's the rebasing. Well, they're saying you didn't use the last $2,000, so you don't need it, right? So here are the deadlines to appeal. You must request a hearing within 10 days of receipt of notice to continue services at existing levels. So again, these are kids already on the wait, not kids on the wait list. Otherwise, you have 30 days. Failure to timely request waives the right to a hearing. However, you can always reapply. You can send in an application as many times as you want. And actually, one of the things I wanted to talk about, for example, I had a case recently. This is going to sound really funny, but we filed a crisis toll. Youth was aging out last year. We filed a crisis toll, and he was found eligible because he was homeless. However, APD denied the level of services that he was currently getting because we had him in what we call a DD family care home, a Devereaux family care home. So he was receiving residential rehabilitation at his Devereaux foster home. So they denied that. They said that he should just be in an apartment. No, they said he should be in what we call like a basic group home, which is him and other people, and then somebody comes and checks on him. And I've been working with this youth for a while, and I knew that that was not sufficient for him. It just wasn't sufficient for him. Maybe it would be for other clients. So instead of filing an appeal, and I could have filed an appeal, and I was ready to go if I needed to, what we actually did was we resubmitted the request through the waiver support coordinator. Why? Because when I realized through the first cost plan that had been submitted, the second part of the crisis tool, was none of the updated documentation had been provided. Okay, he had been suspended in school for punching his teacher when she told him that Blue's Clues was canceled. Okay, he had aggression, and he didn't have it often, but when he had it, it was significant. Okay, but none of that, his treatment plan through Devereaux, none of that was included in his crisis packet to APD. So how is APD supposed to know that he needs more than what they recommended if you didn't provide it? Okay, and that's one of the problems that we have. Yes, sir?
I think one thing you should know, based upon a recent federal court decision, we no longer do the 1030, it's just 30 days.
You know, I saw that, but then I went on your website. Are you believing?
Yes.
I went on the website, and they still had the brochure for the administrative appeal for the 10 days. So just to be safe, I'm still telling people to do 10 days.
Now, the quicker the better, but it is 30 days.
Okay, great. That makes me really happy. I'll spread the word. Yeah, that's awesome.
I think you guys came for that.
Yeah, you guys can do that. Thank you. Whatever you want. And you know what? I had actually seen that, but I thought. Anyway, I checked your website, but it wasn't updated.
I'm not IT, I'm just here.
That's okay. All right, so notify APD of your intent to appeal the first steps. You're and then authorization and waiver of confidentiality signed by the legal guardian. If it's received or faxed by mail after 5, it's noted as received the next day. An attorney doesn't have to file this. A case manager or someone at the CPC can file it. Okay, so if they haven't been able to get an attorney on board, just go ahead and file that notice, and then start working behind your attorneys. Oh, so for attorneys representing kids, and I know we have a couple in here, you can do one of two things. Either get your court order that allows you to file an appeal on behalf of the child, or just have the legal guardian sign a piece of paper saying that you can represent the kid. For me, I just have the legal guardian, the case manager sign the piece of paper, and then I'm done. I'm ready to go. And this is just very briefly the appellate process, file a notice of appeal. Standard of review is de novo. The burden is on the petitioner if the application for benefits was denied. The burden of proof is on the APD if it wants to reduce or terminate services. Standard of proof is preponderance of the evidence. Hearsay evidence may be used, but it shall not be sufficient to support a finding. It generally proceeds like any other fair rights hearing, and we've included just some sample pleadings that we have for you guys to review. Here are some of the things that I like to think about before I start filing an appeal. Was the application filed sufficient? If the answer is no, sometimes I'm just going to file the application again. And we have actually been successful that way. Okay? Experts. This is a really big one. Do you have one? Are they willing to testify? I've had experts tell me, I did the evaluation, but I won't testify. Who's going to pay for it? Who did I tell you guys before I get to pay for stuff? There you go. I call CBC. They'll pay for it. I'm not saying everybody would, but yeah. I mean, that's actually a really big question. Who's going to pay for it? It's a huge question. Is the dependency case going to close shortly? That's just something we need to keep an eye on. We need to know how would that affect our appeal. And is the child actually going to accept APD services? This is a really tough one. I'm not saying you shouldn't pursue it, but you need to be mentally prepared for when that kid tells you, I don't want to be an APD. I want you to leave me alone. And we have to figure that out. But we have had, we got a kid on the wait list when she was 14, 15. And she was very clear, I'm going to be on my own, I'm not going to have anything to do with any of you. Foster care, I don't want to talk to any of you. And she's now 18, she's had 2 children already. And guess what she declined when I saw her in court a couple weeks ago? APD? She said, no, don't want it. So that's just something to think about. I still go through the whole process, I pursue everything, I go all the way through, but I do have to take stock in the fact that if they decline it, I can't force them to do it. Although I'd like to do that. All right, so here's what happens. So the child is not eligible. And then everybody's like, what do you mean they go on a waiting list? Like a waiting list? What do you mean by a waiting list? This is what I mean. So there are approximately 21,000 people waiting for APD services. And there are about 30,000 people receiving waiver services. There is a Florida law that requires children in the foster care system to receive priority for enrollment over all others, except those deemed in crisis. That would only play out if we had excess money in the budget, which they don't. According to APD, the youth keeps its classification if they exit the dependency system 18 plus. I don't know how that plays out with extended foster care, which I'm not checking with a technical. Yeah. All right, so here's some of the questions I get all the time. So why am I going to apply for APD if the kid's going on the wait list? Like, what are you talking about? Family is not on the radar of APD if the case closes, okay? Even if they're on the wait list, APD does reach out once a year, just kind of, update address, update phone numbers. Please let them know when the child's moving, when the case closes. It's one of the first things we do. We notify APD and say, case is closed, here's your legal guardian, here's your information, so that they can have it in their database. Child can access services if he or she reaches certain types of permanency. We're going to talk about that in 1 second because I'm really excited about that. Child can access APD placements and other services. So, if you would like your kid to go to an APD group home, if that's the appropriate placement for them, and I'm not saying that it is, APD has to approve that placement. In fact, you have to go through APD in order to get that spot in an APD group home. Guess what? They have to be on the wait list in order to access that placement. That's one of the main reasons why when these kids come in, I'm immediately running for eligibility for APD, because I'm not saying that all their placements break down, but if they're in a regular group home and they're not being served the way that they need to be served because of their disabilities, guess where we end up going down the road? APD group home. And again, it's regardless of who pays. So if they go into an APD group home and they're on the wait list, that's CBC payment. That, you know, not even there. I'm concerned with. And also for purposes of the crisis toll, I would much rather apply when the kid is 15 years old instead of filing the application and the crisis toll when they're turning 18, because guess what? APD is going to do the eligibility first and then do the crisis toll second. So why am I waiting until the last minute? I want to file this as soon as the kids come into care. Oh, here's my last one. I didn't put it on the slide. I've had already 4 kids that I got on the wait list before their cases closed come back. That totally breaks my heart. I don't want them back in foster care. But now that they're back in foster care, guess what I don't have to do again? I don't have to do the APD stuff. It's all done. And if I need to access APD services, even though the CBC is paying for it, it's literally a done deal. We just got a shelter this week. One of my kids is coming back. I got her on the wait list. I can just contact the CBC and say, hey, this kid's back. She's on the wait list. Please put her, put her on your list for kids with APD. All right, so here's the new legislation on permanency for children eligible for APD. At the time of finalization of an adoption with placement in the family home, reunification with family members with placement in the family home, or permanent placement with a relative in a family home, shall be moved to the waiver. Okay. So, it has to be in a family home. So what this means is this whole reunification, I'll pay for leave the kid at the group home, but then the mom and dad have custody. That's not going to work. Kid has to be in a home setting. I have 2 kids today with autism that were adopted this morning. They are on the wait list. I shall be calling APD on Monday and saying, hey, kids were adopted, guess what? APD services. Yes, ma'am?
Do they have a time frame that they're obligated to transition into the waiver after that?
I don't know of a time frame, but I can tell you my kids are getting on it pretty quickly. They're going out there very quickly to see the families and say, how can we help? Now, I'm going to tell you that the families will likely only qualify for a waiver support coordinator, which is like their case manager, and respite. But I got to tell you, respite is very helpful for our families. Okay? If you've got a kid in your home who has developmental disabilities and has a really hard time, being out in public at certain grocery stores. I've got one kid that can't go into any grocery stores. The lighting really, really bothers him. With respite, mom can go to the grocery store and do groceries and he doesn't have to go with her. So respite is really important. And more importantly, beyond all that, now we're on the APD waiver. Yes, sir?
My understanding was that statute was only good for the $31 million for the 1 year. Do you know if that was extended during the last legislative session?
There's more funding available this year to keep off the wait list, and I think there's more for the relocation, right?
Yeah. I don't know about the legislation. I can tell you that I had no trouble getting my kids the waiver services upon permanency. I've had 0 problems. It's pretty quickly. I've had one family decline services, but the rest of all the families have accepted services. Yes, ma'am.
The permanent placement, is that parental guardianship?
Oh, yes, ma'am. With a relative. Permanent placement with a relative in a family home. So it's either adoption, reunification with family members, or permanent placement with a relative. Yes, ma'am. PG. But I think it's PG with a relative. So now PG with a non-relative. Yes, sir.
Are the services upon placement or upon closure?
That's the question. I'm going to tell you that adoption is finalization. I wish it had been placement. That's how I would have preferred, because we obviously want to close the adoption with the family already knowing what services they're going to receive. So my personal preference would have been placement. As far as reunification with family members or placement in a family home or permanent placement, I would try as soon as they're reunified. I don't think that that's part as clear as the statute. But the adoption finalization is pretty clear. It's when the adoption is. I'm sorry? Oh, that was effective as of, it was last year. I thought it was July 1st. Yeah, it was last year. I've already had like 4 kids get services through this waiver. All right, I'm going to be reading quick about the crisis tool can be filed at any time, regardless of how long they've been on the waiting list. If successful, the child gets taken off the wait list and begins to receive APD services. It's sort of a two-step process now, so you file crisis tool 1, is child homeless, yes or no? Comes back, crisis tool part 2, what services will they be receiving? Or, yeah, what services will they be looking for? Who can request the crisis tool? The individual, family, or waiver support coordinator. So it goes to the local area first, the local APD office, and they have to approve or deny it. If they approve their local part of it, then it goes to Tallahassee and it has to be approved up there. If the crisis was under homelessness or the cost plan is denied, the decision can be appealed. So what do we normally do for a crisis pool? 90 days prior to the youth turning 18, the dependency case managers should begin receiving or requesting all of this stuff. School records, treatment plans, psychiatric, medical records. We submit the paperwork to APD locally 60 days prior to the youth aging out. And then if a QSI questionnaire for situational information has not been completed, APD will go out and complete that as part of their local crisis school review. How can GALs attorneys for kids help? If you suspect a child has a developmental disability, ask for the appropriate testing to be completed. Please remember the evaluation must be completed prior to the youth turning 18. Okay? You can get the evaluation after they turn 18 as long as that testing was done prior to the age of 18. Ensure that the crisis tool is completed and submitted to APD 60 days prior to the youth aging out. And work with the youth to formulate several backup plans. I like to have like 4. Sometimes I only have 2 and maybe one really good one and the other one's just kind of like, a shot. Yes, sir?
Could you explain what you meant by the evaluation versus the testing? The age?
All of the testing has to be done prior to the age of 18. Sometimes though, it takes like a month to get the IG testing back. So the testing has to be done prior to the age of 18. Okay? Do I have yes, sir?
I think one thing is you obviously have a very good system here. For all of y'all, if you're ever doing it for anybody else statewide, get some sort of verification when you actually file the tool. Like she gets something back from the manager. But if you're doing it yourself, get an email from us, something in writing, something that says we actually have it. Because Bill and I work with Bill, and there have been times in the work and say, I filed it. And we have no record of that being anywhere. So it would be helpful to, if you don't know any people in your area really well, just get some verification that, yes, we actually received this tool.
And that's why the point of contact, that's why that person, that's the person that I talk to every day, all the time, because we're constantly talking about all of our APD kids. So having that relationship with whoever that point of contact with APD is really important. Any other questions? Well, I'll be, stick around if you guys want to chat with me. And we have, where's the candy stuff? We want candy, it's like 8 packs of stuff. Really don't want to take it all home. Thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it.